Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by writer-director Wayne Kramer. Over the course of his career, he has directed a diverse body of work, including The Cooler, Running Scared, Crossing Over, and the Pawn Shop Chronicles, earning a reputation for creating intense, character-driven films. It is my pleasure to welcome Wayne Kramer.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about you, Wayne?
I'm good.
Great. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to join me today. I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome.
And Wayne, you were born in South Africa, and if I'm not mistaken, you emigrated to the US in 1986. And which moment in your life was a turning point in terms of pursuing a career as a filmmaker?
I think as a young kid, very young, maybe 5 or 6, I realized I had a love for movies and a lot of things American. And I pestered my parents, telling them I would be moving to America one day, and I don't think they believed me. And I grew up in a country that had very strict censorship. So I think a lot of that also pushed me in the direction of leaving the country because I wanted to see the kind of films I wanted to see, and I didn't want to have to be considered a criminal for watching them. And at the same time, all that censorship probably made something in me like, okay, I'll make films one day that the South African Censorship Board would not be able to uh, pass or give a rating to. But I think ever since probably I saw the first 16 millimeter, because we didn't have TV at the time, the first 16 millimeter episode of Batman, I think I think it was like, okay, yeah, that's the place I want to go live in. Of course, you see the country through rose-colored glasses when you're outside of the place, and there's once you start living here, you form a more realistic picture of America. And at the same time, as a writer and later on, and obviously as a director, but more importantly as a writer, I had to develop American voice to write my scripts in. Because even though I grew up speaking English as a first language, the English that you speak in America is quite different, and the colloquialisms and the use of language. So I arrived with about like 10 scripts that I thought were, and this was at age 21, and I thought they were great scripts, but of course they were terrible. And I thought they sounded American, and probably to Americans, they probably thought, what the hell am I reading? So that's a convoluted way of answering your question, I think.
And you just told me you thought the scripts were great, but eventually they were not. But what do you think makes a script a great script? What are the ingredients of a great script, character and also story wise?
Yeah, I'm a very story driven person. So, as much as I can appreciate what you would call an art movie, which has great visuals, but might be more abstract in the narrative, I tend to favor films that have very clear storytelling, a very clear beginning, middle, and end, even if the end is ambiguous, but just a clear, almost not even a traditional narrative, but a story that will suck me in as opposed to being very obscure to follow. And so I do think a good screenplay, especially if you're trying to um, sell it to more of a commercial enterprise like an American film studio or a streamer, I think you need a good hook. First of all, I think the concept of the story needs to be very strong. And that is maybe one of the toughest things to achieve is just to bring some kind of originality to making films on storytelling. And the other thing is obviously characters and dialogue, authentic dialogue, characters, authentic characters. And for me, I like to read, or my goal is to create something a little bit unpredictable. a little bit dangerous because I think audiences who live in the Marvel universe today feel too safe. They know that even if half the Marvel characters get wiped out in one movie, they'll be coming back in some way or form. And I want the audience to feel like this film could go anywhere. These characters are in real jeopardy. And by the end of the film, the person that I feel the most for may not survive. And I like a little bit of dark humor. But I do think the storytelling has to be original and clear and surprising.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And I have a question regarding one of your comments on an article, which you also posted on social media. And you said your kind of films are difficult to get greenlit and financed. And how would you describe your kind of movie and why are they difficult to get financed, made, especially in this day and age?
Well, they definitely are. And I would describe my films as geared towards an adult audience for sure. They tend to inhabit a criminal world, or they're characters that tend to end up in desperate situations. The characters act as if they're in the real world. They curse. There's strong violence, but not. I'm not somebody who, how can I say it? I'm not a big proponent of the John Wick kind of violence where it seems like you shoot 1,000 people, you don't care about anybody that gets killed. It's very cartoonish. I'm more of a fan of like a real world violence. Example of that would be William Friedkin's To Live and Die in L.A. When somebody gets shot in the face with a shotgun, you feel it and you're kind of in shock about it. And that death is a meaningful death. I like realistic sexuality in a movie. If couples been together for a long time, they're not hiding their nudity from themselves and therefore not really the audience. And I'm not talking about gratuitous nudity or sex. I'm just talking about realistic or the kind that drives the story forward, and you see how these characters behave in a certain way. Um, I'm not a fan of the sort of candy coated PG-13 kind of films that are generally made today, or what the very over the top CGI heavy kind of films. I like films about human emotion and the way human beings respond to one another. And I think that even though I don't consider my films art house, they may sort of nudge towards that line, but I think my films are generally commercial, and I don't think my films can be made for extremely low budgets. I have worked mostly in the independent area of filmmaking, but with budgets that would be considered quite high for today, range, $20 million and under. And today that's quite rare to be able to get those kind of budgets for the films I'm describing. So it's all about tone for me, and I tend to enjoy more the tone of like a Sidney Lumet movie, realistic cop movies, crime movies, all of William Friedkin or a Sam Peckinpah or Don Siegel, Walter Hill, all those filmmakers, Brian De Palma to a certain extent, who is a favorite filmmaker of mine, they all are trying to tell a realistic story, but with cinematic style.
As far as I'm concerned, I never think in terms of, big budget, low budget, a big studio movie or independent film. I think in terms of good movie, mediocre movie, or bad movie. Just because it's a big studio film, it doesn't mean it's gonna be a good movie. And I think for many, many years, many of the independent films have clearly surpassed many of the major Hollywood studio productions. At least that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. My favorite films, and let's take some of the films that we all love from the 70s, like Chinatown, or Rosemary's Baby or Blade Runner, or all of these films today would be considered too dark or too adult in tone. And even though some of those are genre films, or take a film like The Exorcist, nobody in The Exorcist is acting like they're in a horror movie. It takes a long time for The Exorcist to actually point towards this is going to be a supernatural experience. And those kind of films are what used to be considered studio films, and now they're relegated to being considered independent films. But those studio films were made at very healthy budgets, whereas the kind of films they expect you to make today, you're crushed down to probably want you to make it 6 million and under, and it's very difficult to get that kind of style, camera movement, production value that on $6 million and under, and be a union production where everybody's getting the whole crew is getting paid very well. It's very difficult to make that kind of movie today and have it feel like the movie you saw. Plus, you have to shoot on digital. I'm not the biggest fan of digital. I would love to be shooting on celluloid still, but it's like at least another $400,000-500,000 cost to your production. And as an independent filmmaker, you go, would I rather get 5 more shooting days, or do I end up shooting on film, on digital, and trying to make it look like film? So obviously you want the shooting days. So it's a difficult arena, but it's one, the thing is as well, what determines your budget is the level of actors you get. And that's the thing I put the most emphasis on. If you can't cast your film with big names, you're not going to get any film made at all. But you're certainly not, the bigger the name, the sort of bigger the budget. So if Christian Bale decides he's going to do your movie, you're probably looking at $20 to $30 million budget right then and there. And I think actors control the industry today, and you have to have an ability or find a way to get an actor to support you to get your movie to move forward. Because it's been a while since I made a movie, but it's not from lack of trying. It's from the fact that I'm maybe not getting access to the right actors, because there are a lot of financiers who've come along and said, yeah, we'll finance your movie, but we expect you to cast one of these 10 or 15 top actors for the role. And they are very difficult to get, especially in today's industry, because the streamers like Netflix and Apple and Amazon are offering them TV series, big money, which tie them up for 6 to 8 months. And then on the other side, you've got the studios still offering them big money, and they'll tie them up for 3-4 months. And then they have these tiny little windows every year, if they're even going to work again, to do an independent film where they know they won't get paid as much as the studios or the streamers. And everybody's competing for those small windows. And this may be like, at any given point, 20 to 30 bankable actors that can get your film financed. And even if you get one of them, you still need another 1 or 2 more other actors for the financiers or the sales agents to feel comfortable selling the movie.
That's very interesting in terms of getting the budget and getting the right distribution and, let's say, bankable names. I'm curious because you've had a fair share of really great actors and bankable names. I mean, you have directed actors such as Harrison Ford, Ray Liotta, Alec Baldwin. I mean, these are big names, and especially Harrison Ford was a major star and still is today at the age of 80. How did you manage to assemble a cast this big, a star-studded cast for your film crossing over? I mean, Ray Liotta, Harrison Ford, so many others. How?
Sean Penn was in it at one point. He got cut out of the movie.
Okay.
It wasn't my choice. It was a complicated situation, but it really came down to Harvey Weinstein. I think with Crossing Over, I was coming off a movie called Running Scared that Quentin Tarantino had seen and he liked very much. And he said to Harvey Weinstein, "You should be in business with this guy." And then Harvey Weinstein said, "Okay, I'm going to make this guy's next movie." But he actually made a deal with me for a horror script I had called Evil Seek, which had Thomas Jane attached. And then Harvey Weinstein had a film in post production called Kill Shot with Thomas, and the film wasn't working. And for some ridiculous reason, he put the blame on Thomas. So he was dragging his feet in terms of greenlighting this script called Evil Seek because he felt he didn't want to move ahead with Thomas, and Thomas was in my contract. And it was just a stupid, ridiculous position to take. But you couldn't tell Harvey anything. You couldn't convince this man to change his mind about anything. And I had just finished the script called Crossing Over, and my agent said to me, "Well, why don't we see if Harvey wants to do this film instead, and move it into production quickly, rather than Evil Seek, because it doesn't seem like he's going to make Evil Seek." So, uh, and I had a deal with Harvey where he had what's called a pay or play deal, where he had to pay me for the deal, and I didn't particularly want somebody to pay me for nothing. I wanted to make a film, so we showed him the script, and he liked the script a lot. And then he said about casting it aggressively, and I had actually been courting Kevin Costner to play the lead in that film, and really wrote it with him in mind. And I actually after a long time of trying, got Kevin to agree to do it. But Kevin was asking for more money than what Harvey wanted to pay, because Harrison Ford, it's a weird thing. Harrison Ford had turned down the script, I think, once or twice, because we had approached him about it, or I think Harvey or someone else approached him about it. But I think that's because he saw the cooler, and I guess he didn't really love the cooler. But then his agents showed him Running Scared, and he liked Running Scared a lot, which I would not have thought would be a film Harrison Ford would have loved that much or liked that much. And then and it was just like we had Frank Marshall on, who was producing, and Frank Marshall, of course, had a huge relationship with Harrison, doing all these movies with him. So Frank reached out to Harrison, and Harvey was kept going after Harrison. And the reason Harrison could do it instead, they got Harrison to do it instead of Kevin Costner, was Harrison wasn't asking as much. And I believe it was because he knew he was doing Indiana Jones. I forget which one that, the Crystal Skull, right after that. And I think he was going to get a ton of money. And so he felt, well, everybody is saying I should work with this director, and the subject matter was interesting to him, but I never ever quite got the feeling that Harrison loved the script. We had a great experience working together. I mean, I just didn't feel like it was a film that Harrison really gravitated towards. But he ended up doing it, and he was a pro about it. He's very professional about it. And then in terms of the other actors, and Sean Penn, Harvey reached out to Sean Penn, and Sean Penn was actually played a sequence that I wish was still in the movie. It was almost like a magic realistic scene that's set on the border. And, the film got so damaged in post-production because Harvey just started chopping it up, cutting down the sexuality, changing scenes. There was, Sean had some political issues with the film, which we figured out during production how to resolve. But when he cut the movie together, Harvey didn't want to pursue it in that direction. And I said, "You're going to have problems with Sean." And he said, "No, don't worry about it. Sean's my brother." And they left it till the very last minute. And then Sean did have problems with it, and they weren't prepared to change it. And they figured between themselves the best thing to do was cut Sean out of the movie. And I didn't really agree with that. And all of these actors, I had a great working relationship with them. Sean as well. I thought Sean was wonderful to work with. And I think there was a good response to the script. People were interested in the subject matter, and there were a lot of actors who sort of wanted different roles in the film. And but it's interesting because yeah, no, it's they we got Ashley Judd and we got and 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 I fought very hard to get Jim Sturgis in the movie because nobody knew Jim that much, and he hadn't come out in Across the Universe yet. But I'd seen his audition for Across the Universe, and I thought he was fantastic. So I pushed to get him in the film, and then Jim felt he had just done that character. But after I told him he could play it any way he wanted, he got on board. And it just, the movies sort of have a momentum to them when casting happens. But generally, there's a term in the business called an actor who's a casting magnet. William H. Macy was that in The Cooler. Once we got William H. Macy or Bill to agree to do it, all the other actors wanted to join up. So in all these films, I don't really think as much that I'm the draw for them as much as who else is in the cast and possibly the script. And then they want to meet you and know that you're competent and you have a good rapport with them. Um, but it's a very complicated way films come together, and it takes years and years, and people don't really understand this. It's I've had over the last year and a half, I had a really bad situation where I had a movie that was 3 days away from production and collapsed because the budget couldn't afford to pay this lead actor who was an Oscar-nominated movie star his fee, and the producers failed completely because they offered him more money than they could afford to make the movie, and they didn't communicate with him. And at the same time, the actor they try to halve his fee, and at the same time, and the actor walked off, and on that end, the actor didn't care that he was abandoning an entire crew, and really, in my opinion, needed this movie to resurrect his career. I think it would have been just a great comeback movie for him. So in that situation, nobody won at all because people aren't doing their homework. People aren't figuring out the real number, the real budget, and producing in a way that you're flying by the seat of your pants. And you're just assuming you're going to cast one or two other actors to bring up the value of the film. But when that doesn't happen, you can't make your budget. And this is a film that has collapsed 3 times, and I think it's my own script, but I think it's a great script, and it's painful to watch these things not be able to happen because you can't get to 8 million, you can only get to 5.5 or 6, or the valuation of that movie is low. And then it's also weird because a guy like Quentin Tarantino would never be struggling for $8 million on that movie. He would get to make that movie for 50 million. So a lot of times it is who's making it, who's in it. It's just difficult. It was a lot easier 15 years ago. A movie like that would have been made easily just on that one actor, and it would have been probably made for a $15 million budget. But the streamers I think have been very damaging to independent film, because you see all these movies go to Sundance and they come out of Cannes, and they don't get to have a theatrical window. The streamers buy them up. There's no promotion. They just disappear into the ether. You'll be clicking through Netflix or Hulu one day and you go, oh my God, that movie was at Sundance. I didn't even know it got released. And the financiers of these movies can't make their money back. There's no video market where that used to guarantee them a certain amount on the home video. It's very difficult to finance these movies. And for me, as I mentioned before, it's so challenging to give people this Hollywood style looking movie when you don't have enough money to do that, because it takes time and crew to light a film. If you see a film which has a very interesting or cool one kind of shot, a shot where goes on for 5-6 minutes and all this different stuff happens in the shot, that has to be rehearsed for probably 3/4 of the day. And it's very risky to do that on a low budget movie, because if you don't get that shot, you've just blown a whole day of filmmaking versus getting what is considered traditional coverage. And I'm not really a filmmaker that likes to do traditional coverage. I like to block out a complicated set of events and try and get it in one, and then and you can see that in my films. In example would be like most of the scene in Running Scared, where Vera Farmiga is trying to rescue Cameron Bright from the apartment with the pedophiles. That was originally, I would say, at least the second half of it was all shot as one, and then but then you find most of it was, and maybe that now has one or two cuts in it just for pacing. But it was a very difficult sequence to set up that I would probably not be able to shoot that movie. I would probably not be able to make that movie today, period, because, and especially not with the style I did on that film. And that film was shot mostly in Prague and ended up having, I think, a $16 million budget. But back in 2004, when we actually shot that film, if we had shot it in the United States, that movie back then would have cost $35 million. Wow. So it's just a crazy business. And I know this question started out, how do you get these actors? But it's all interrelated.
You just mentioned one particular scene in Running Scared with the pedophiles. I thought this was the creepiest segment of the film. Do you think that your films had to, or that you as a director had to deal with many issues regarding the MPAA?
Oh yeah. Well, the situation on the cooler was quite notorious, and they gave the cooler an NC-17 over one 3-second scene, which we tried to appeal, and we lost that appeal, and so I had to make an adjustment only in the US version of the film. So all other countries, European countries mainly, got to see the uncut version. But the problem with the cooler was we finished the entire film and did not submit what's known as a sort of a rough cut to the MPAA. So we did all the mixing and the color correction and all of that. So they only Lionsgate bought the film at the Sundance Film Festival, and they submitted it to the MPAA, and that's when we had problems. So I learned my lesson after that. When I was making Running Scared, I was very careful to submit a version to the MPAA that I was sure was not going to get a NC-17 rating, and don't want to really go too much into that because I have to keep that card in my back pocket for future productions. But it's much easier. It's much easier when you know you're going to have a challenging film and you're going to have maybe issues with the MPAA, but they seem to have lightened up a bit over the last couple of years. I don't think there is, the streamers don't care if a movie's rated or not. I think the game has kind of changed, and they're not as prudish, or they were as being a stickler for this or that. So I'm not really concerned about them anymore. I don't know. I don't see that. I don't think I'm making anything in the future that'll have problems with it. But you never know. That's unpredictable. But I don't hear too many stories about somebody saying they couldn't get an R rating anymore. I mean, look at John Wick, right? How many people do you shoot in the head in that film? Like 500 people, and they still get their R rating. And you know what? The other thing is there's almost no sex left in American films. People are afraid of sex today and nudity. So you certainly, I don't think anybody. I doubt the MPAs had a very explicit sex scene submitted to them in years. If those scenes are happening, they're happening on some TV series maybe, or European films. So maybe they're going out of business soon.
Amazing. I mean, Wayne, I was rewatching The Cooler just a couple of weeks ago, and watching that film, and I watched the uncut version. I never would have thought that, it was an issue for the MPAA or MPA. Sometimes it's so ridiculous. You have to fight over so many little scenes, just a couple of seconds, and those can make a difference between an R rating and an NC-17. I think it's completely ridiculous, especially with The Cooler, just because a couple of seconds. I mean, where does it all end?
Um, you know, that situation, I don't even think the MPA was responding to the nudity. It was a scene of Bill Macy was going down on Maria Bello, and you didn't really see anything. But as his head was coming up, you saw a glimpse of a pubic hair for 1 second. But I don't think that's the reason why they wanted the cut. I think the scene felt very real to them because a lot of it was just held on Maria Bella's face, exhibiting pleasure. And I think it felt very real and made them uncomfortable. And so they couldn't say, oh, you've got to cut her face. They were like, they just pointed to the first thing that they thought was giving offense, and there was a glimpse of pubic hair. It was irrational, and you couldn't even at that time you couldn't even point to an example of another movie and say, look, you allowed that shot and you allowed that shot. You weren't even allowed to do that. I think today you can make comparisons when you appeal with them. But I think it was the authenticity of the moment that rubbed them the wrong way, no pun intended, and that is why we ended up in that situation. But it really upset me because I was somebody who grew up with very strict censorship in South Africa, and I thought, oh, I'm coming to America, and you can make movies, and everything is free, and if you want to do an erotic sex scene or a realistic sex scene, this is the country that's going to release it and not give you problems. But turns out there is censorship in America. It's just corporate censorship. Because you could have got an NC-17 on the cooler and released it. Nobody was saying you couldn't release that movie, but it's not good business because they would be closing out a section of the audience, and a lot of theaters wouldn't show NC-17 films. So there was no way I was ever going to get away with saying to Lionsgate, oh, and throw a tantrum and you've got to release the NC-17. The moment we lost the appeal, I just said, well, obviously I'm going to have to make the cut because I have to be realistic about the economics of it. And again, I don't hear too many stories today about that because what is a feature film anyway today? I mean, some of the biggest feature films are debuting on Apple TV or Netflix, and nobody seems particularly preoccupied with the ratings anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I was just recently finishing season 2 of Sex Life, which is on Netflix. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's
I know of it. I haven't seen it, but the lead actress was actually in Crossing Over in a small role.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
this it's pretty quote unquote graphic
yeah.
in terms of certain sex scenes and nudity, and it's on Netflix. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was no way you could have shown that in any R-rated movie, not without the MPA giving you a hard time. No way.
Yeah. I don't, I don't, here's the thing. I don't think anybody's made a film in the last 5, 10 years that's challenged the MPA with scenes like that because I don't think those films are getting made, not in the US. And if they're coming over as foreign films, they're probably not getting a theatrical release anyway. So, but that sort of what you would call 70s or 80s kind of explicitness in film has definitely moved over to television. And nobody cares. But in fact, they actually want more. Those are those types of situations where they say to the creators, can we spice this up a bit? So I don't know if I'm going to face that challenge in film too much going forward.
I would like to talk briefly about Land, which is a film which you have started in 1992. And I hope I'm not misquoting. I mean, you said it was a nightmarish scenario from beginning to end. And can you elaborate on that? What made it so difficult? I mean, this was 10 years before you released The Cooler.
Yeah, it was actually, we made that film in 1990, and I had scraped together through private financiers, very small budget. It started out, believe it or not, to be a $30,000 film. And then by the time we didn't really even get it all in the can the first time around, but it ended up costing around 100,000. That even by today's standards, that's an extremely low budget for a 35 millimeter film. But it was a complete disaster. There were so many reasons that made it a disaster. I guess you could say, on one level, I was inexperienced as a filmmaker. I had a vision for that film, but I didn't understand how little and how slow film production moves. And and my ambition for that film certainly could not be achieved on so little money. But the other thing is, I was quite young at the time. I was 25, and I had a crew they were like a non-union crew. They were specifically the cinematographer. He was really just almost impossible to deal with. He was we did not get on at all, and he um basically signed on to this movie to shoot a director's reel for himself. So we're in an independent film, when you were supposed to be shooting 6 to 8 minutes a day, he was shooting maybe a minute. And he was just, he didn't care what my shooting schedule was. He was an abusive person. I disliked him intensely. I could go into stories about what this guy did that I'm not going to elaborate on too much. But he was actually the second of three cinematographers who came onto that film. The first group was the first cinematographer and his team. I hired them. I didn't do too much due diligence. I saw a documentary they shot, and I thought, oh, okay, it seems like they can shoot a movie. And we hired them on, and we had this very specific location, which was a theater, and we only had 7 days to shoot it before the theater had to start another production. And at the same time, we were shooting so much, and this was film, remember? So you couldn't just look at your digital monitor to see if you had the shots or not. So we didn't get a chance to look at the dailies until maybe the fifth day of shooting, the end of the fifth day of shooting on the first week. And everything was overexposed and out of focus. There was not a usable piece of footage out of everything we shot. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I felt I had these chest pains. I remember driving back from the lab. I was in the backseat of the car, and my chest was just pounding. And I thought, what have I done? I've blown all my investors' money. What do I do? Do I shut it down now, or do I try and move forward and salvage this film? And so, like, maybe stupidly, I decided to keep going. And over the next few days, we fired the cinematographer, who had his own cameras, or he had the camera rental. So not only did he leave with his crew, he left with all our equipment. So we had to bring in another cinematographer. And again, because we needed to do this immediately, I didn't do due diligence on this guy either. And so it was like going from the frying pan into the fire, except this guy could at least shoot and the film was in focus and not overexposed, but he was basically usurping everything I wanted to do and wresting control of the film. And at the same time, this shooting schedule, which was supposed to be about 4 or 5 weeks, now extended to like over 10 weeks. we were having and the original when we originally started this, everybody was working deferred. I know that's crazy to think of, but everybody was working deferred. And then as things progressed, the actors were like, well, we're not coming to work tomorrow unless you pay us. And we had to pay, and all of a sudden we were incurring all these expenses. And the film is not good. It's not it's actually quite terrible. There are little bits of it that are like, it's like a Rocky Horror Picture Show meets Phantom of the Paradise. And the problem is, you don't set out to make a cult movie. A cult movie becomes a cult movie on its own, through no sort of design of the filmmaker. And the actors were really, the actors were, they were not, they weren't known actors, but they acted like super divas. And it just was the worst conflagration of events that you could ever imagine. And I say it was the ultimate film school. I mean, everything that I knew not to do going forward when I made the cooler, I learned on that film. It was a complete baptism of fire. The film exists only in a work print in my closet today. I say that every filmmaker has one of those. I think the negative may still be sitting at Photocam in the lab. I inquired a few years ago when somebody was interested in making it, but I said, finishing it. But I said to them, to finish this movie and actually make it watchable, you're probably going to have to spend several $100,000, and I don't think it's worth it. And it's not like I feel this is Reservoir Dogs sitting in my closet and never got a chance for anyone to see it. I think it's possibly better that the world does not see this film. But I did say, like, somebody was interested, a pretty well-known company about a year ago was interested in finishing it and releasing it. And I said to them, I would only do it on one condition, that I make an accompanying documentary about everything that happened on that film and how hellish it was, as a sort of a what not to do kind of film school for people watching. So the emphasis would be on the documentary, but nothing's really moved forward with it since. I think it's because I wouldn't give them control of the final cut of the film, which why should I? But I'm more than happy to not have the world see this film.
It's like, sounds like a cautionary tale on filmmaking.
It was definitely a more interesting film, what happened behind the scenes. But as somebody who didn't really go to film school, because I did like what's known as sort of like one semester at a school in Johannesburg. I mean, in Pretoria, in South Africa. And it was not a film school that I sort of felt engaged by, because it was very technical. They wanted to spend the first couple of months teaching you how films get processed in the lab, but it was very science-based and there wasn't a lot of actual practical filmmaking. And so I disengaged from it and spent more time running around to the video stores in the area where the film school was, because they had all these uncensored films. And so my films, I took that year of film school to actually watch the films that I was dying to watch all over all these years, because they just happened to be a couple of video stores that didn't care about the film censorship code, and they were getting all these pirated copies in from England, and who knew that they existed. So that was more my film school, was like finding copies of the uncut Mad Max and the Evil Dead and the Howling and everything else that I wanted to see. But Blazeland was a kind of a nightmarish experience, because even in film school, you don't really get taught that you have to make your day. Otherwise, if you go 1 hour into overtime, that you could cost the production $50,000, $80,000, $100,000. I mean, with depending on the size of your crew, you don't feel that in film school, that the clock's ticking and money's just ticking away, and the pressure, whether it be via the bond company or the producers, that you can't get all the shots and you've got 1 hour left and have six setups left, and how are you going to modify the script, or how are you going to figure out how to do it in two setups? And those are things I feel like the pressure isn't on anyone in film school, because nobody's getting paid and everybody just comes back the next weekend, or um, and those are tough things to learn in the real time experience.
Thank you, Wayne. And I think it is also essential to have a good producer. And I know that you had worked with Edward Pressman on The Cooler and you had worked with him once. Would you say that he was the most, let's say, interesting or powerful producer you had ever worked with, or the producer who backed you the most and supported you the most?
Yes, I don't know if he was the most powerful producer, but he was definitely the most supportive producer. And I probably only have a career thanks to Ed, because I was considered a first-time director, and a lot of people didn't want me to direct The Cooler, because nobody wants a first-time director, and they all like the script, but nobody wants a first-time director, and so they always try and talk you out of it. I was not in a position to be talked out of it, because I had written a previous script called Mindhunters that I actually wanted to direct. And of course, the same thing, nobody wanted me to, but it was sold to a studio. So I thought, I'll take the money this time so I don't have to take the money the next time. And that's what happened with The Cooler. But Ed, and I had storyboarded the entire film. So I brought in this big Bible of storyboards, my own drawings that I showed to Ed, and they could see I knew how to make this film and I was very passionate about it. And he backed me creatively 100%. I tell the funny story how the first days dailies, or maybe it was the first 2 days dailies, the lab transferred them incorrectly to video. So the film was shot in Super 35 and they transferred it as if it was anamorphic. So all the actors' faces appeared half off the screen, and it was way too dark. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. And my cinematographer is getting fired the first when I looked at the dailies. And then I got a phone call soon after from Ed Pressman. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to lay into me about how incompetent this film looks. And he said, I love the dailies. Keep going. Well done. And I was like, I was in shock. I was like, and I think Ed knew that something had happened with the lab. And I think he knew that it looked like crap. But he was just that kind of supportive guy. And of course, the film didn't look like crap. It looked beautiful. Jimmy Whittaker, this DP, had done a great job shooting it. And the lab really fucked us. But Ed, there were a number of times where the producers thought something different about the cut of the film, or yeah, you know, we showed the film initially, and some people thought the sex scenes were too explicit. And I would say to Ed, this is why it should be this way. Or there was a scene cut from the film with Paul Savino, the main Paul Savino scene, and in post production, I felt it was a mistake, and my post supervisor also felt that way. And I was able to, and the film had already been locked, but I was able to convince Ed to let me put the scene back in. He uh, he was just a great guy. He was I mean, look at the body of work of films he's produced. Some of the best filmmakers in the business, iconic filmmakers, iconic films. And to be honest, I never really had that good an experience on any other film I directed. It were it was always a fight after that. And then when you make a film with Harvey Weinstein, and to be clear, the Cooler, I mean, the crossing over never had any production problems. It was a very smooth shoot, got on well with all the actors. It was in post production that Harvey started dismantling the film in a very disrespectful way. He even fired my composer, John Murphy, who's a wonderful composer, a brilliant composer, who composed a brilliant score. But it wasn't me like Harvey would even call me up and say, I don't like the music, I'm firing John Murphy. I'd be in a meeting with Harvey talking about the cut of the film. And in the background, he'd be taking a phone call trying to hire another composer onto the film. He wouldn't even address it with tell me I'm going to hire another composer. He was just a nightmare, and he destroyed that film. I actually think that was the best film I've made, and that version has never been seen, and it destroys me even today. I don't know what will happen in the future because Lionsgate owns it now, but I guess I need to make a couple more successful movies, or even a couple more movies, and maybe be able to convince Lionsgate to let me put together the real cut of that film, which would have been about 20 minutes longer, more edgy, includes the Sean Penn scenes, includes the John Murphy score. As much as I love, and I know this is a music show, film music show as well. As much as I love Mark Isham, I loved what John had done for that film. But by the time Mark came onto that film, the direction I wanted to go in clearly wasn't going to work with Harvey Weinstein. And so Mark's hands were tied. He had to just take it straight down the middle, and he did the best job he could. But it wasn't the score that I felt the movie needed. And that was no fault of Mark at all.
It sounds like a real nightmare and pain in the ass scenario, excuse me, pardon my French. I mean, you have told me about a number of major disadvantages when it comes to working with Harvey Weinstein. Were there any serious or major advantages of working with Mr. Weinstein and the Weinstein Company, or Miramax and Harvey and Bob Weinstein? Can you disclose that? Would you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Well, one of the big positives of working with Harvey was he could pull in actors. He could pick up a phone and call Sean Penn and say, Sean, you need to do this movie, and he wouldn't care what the agents thought. And he definitely made it easier to cast that film. And at the same time, when Harvey wanted to make a project, he would write a check right away. It wouldn't be messing you around with lawyers. And I mean, he did that too, but he would say, like, when he wanted to make Crossing Over, but his deal was for Evil Seek, this other project, he just said, I'm writing a check for you tomorrow. It's a penalty, or my agent worked it out. And the money arrives. When Harvey wanted something, the money would arrive. Like nobody, Harvey didn't have to go to a board, or he didn't have to go to a bunch of development executives or anything to get their opinion. He did actually operate from the gut, whether it was good or bad. You were always in the best situation with Harvey when he had already seen your finished movie at a film festival and bought it, and then strategized how to get it out to the world. The movies that he financed himself and developed and put into production, those were the hellish productions, because he second guessed everything, and those movies had not been seen and validated by audiences yet. And it's weird on Crossing Over. It's very weird because I had 3 test screenings of the film, and no matter how much I tried to trim the movie down, because he had a problem with the sex scenes, they were way more explicit, but I felt in a way that had really helped the story. And no matter how I toned those down, I was still getting the same score every single time. It wasn't a terrible score. It was an above average score, but it wasn't in the 90s where they wanted. The score I was getting was showing that this is an adult film for a specific audience. Harvey wanted a 4-quadrant score. He wanted everybody to be able to come see this film, even though he knew the script was not that kind of film. But he kept cutting away, toning it down, doing things. And I try to mirror a little bit of what he was doing, because I could see what his cut was. And when you had a bake-off, you would have 2 previews where the audience comes sees both movies. So my cut was not that different from Harvey, except it had 1 or 2 little things. Yet I still scored in the 70s, and he got it into like 93% or something. And I don't believe that there was that much difference that he could get it into 93%. I think something funny happened behind the scenes. I think Harvey got the score. He wanted to prove the point to me. And I think I can't prove it, but I think the cards were futzed with or something like that. Because it just, the movie was not that extremely different other than where a certain scene came into the movie or not. I don't know. It does intrigue me as to what really happened there. But Harvey, look, Harvey never fucked with Quentin Tarantino his entire career. Um, Harvey could have said Pulp Fiction at 2.5 hours is way too long, and I don't like the order, the non-linear order of the scenes, and you have to do it this way. I think Quentin was very lucky with Harvey. Maybe he knew how to talk to him more diplomatically, or but Quentin's movies never really had sex scenes in them, as far as I can remember. So he didn't really have to challenge Harvey over those. So they were, the films we were making were very different. And I only made one with Harvey, and that would have only been I certainly was not afraid to call Harvey out, and I guess that didn't do so well for my career. But I just I couldn't eat it and then be quiet about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get your point, absolutely. I mean, there are multiple stories of Harvey Weinstein and or similar stories of this kind, and also concerning Guillermo del Toro's Mimic, for instance, which is also or which has been reported as being butchered up and disemboweled by Weinstein, and so many other stories, and so many people could tell you endless stories of uh, of Weinstein. But from what I've heard, I don't think, and that's just my 2 cents. What people have reported about Quentin Tarantino, I don't think he would be shy about telling Weinstein off either.
No, I don't think so, especially not at this point. But when they sold Reservoir Dogs to Miramax, there was contention about showing the ear cutting scene, and Quentin insisted on having it in the movie, and somehow he was able to make the case to Harvey to back him on that. And I don't think if the ear cutting scene had been toned down in the film, it would have made it a less powerful film. But those were the kind of battles Quentin seemed to be able to win, or never really got into too many more with Harvey over anything, or Harvey just trusted him. But after you make Pulp Fiction, I think you're kind of bulletproof in terms of making a film with Harvey. I think Harvey's going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and Quentin's movies are brilliant. So I would imagine there's not too much contention in post production. But they weren't. It wasn't like Quentin was like, "Oh, we're going to have this really uncomfortable sex scene, and it's going to have a lot of nudity, and the things being discussed are quite unsavory." He never had that stuff in his film. So I don't know if Harvey would have confronted him on those and forced him to change them. But again, once you make Pulp Fiction, I think Quentin had a lot of clout in his back pocket. So I think it was a given he was going to have final cut on anything moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, Pulp Fiction was huge, and it had been huge in or at the Cannes Film Festival. I think you pretty much have carte blanche.
When I was cutting Crossing Over, Quentin was actually working on not his own film, but he was producing a film. It was like a motorcycle film in the next cutting room, and I tried to get him to come and see the film and get him sort of on side to sort of support me against Harvey. And then he wasn't able to. But I guess I should have really tried harder to get Quentin to come in and see the film. And he did, when the film got released, even in its butchered form, he did call me the opening weekend. He just went to see it, and he liked it a lot. But it's a funny thing with that film, and I can't really watch the theatrical cut. It's too painful for me to watch it. But it had been reported in the press for months, and it had been the release had been pushed and pushed, and And I think the critics were gearing up to just hate it anyway because they knew how damaged it was. And I'll never forget how the guy who reviewed it on, the Harry Knowles site, Ain't It Cool?
Yeah.
I forget it. I forget the guy's name, maybe Capone or something. But he knew that the movie had been taken out of my hands and had been recut and was hugely damaged. And he just proceeded to kick that movie while it was down and name it the worst film of the year. And I found that so distasteful. Like, it's surely that, and I know that was not the worst film of the year.
Nah, no
You know,
way.
and I
No way.
and it's that kind of film criticism or film journalism that just pisses me off. Yeah.
Truth be told, and I have a very strong opinion when it comes to critics or to self-proclaimed critics and to Rotten Tomatoes. I don't really pay attention to it. And if a film has like a 40% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, what does it tell me? It tells me nothing about the film's quality. Absolutely nothing. I mean, there have been movies rated 95 or 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I watched the film and I was like, how was it possible for that movie to get such a high rating? The story was poor, there was no emotion, it wasn't interesting, not a single interesting character in that movie as far as I was concerned. I would have never given it a higher rating. And I've seen plenty of movies that had a 30% rating, and I was like, why is the rating so low? I don't know. It's
Well,
just
the Rotten Tomatoes is a terrible site, and it's been so damaging to the economic health of certain films and to film criticism itself because people don't, for the most part, click on the negative reviews to actually read that there were things in the film that the critic liked, but overall maybe didn't think the film worked as well or got there. And it becomes a very thumbs up, thumbs down kind of way of looking at art and film. And there's no nuance to it. And there are examples I can recount from Rotten Tomatoes of movies that I think are brilliant. I think are cutting edge, amazing films like Man on Fire that has like a 37, 38% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. My most popular film by far is Running Scared, and that has like a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, Rotten Tomato. It's just, you need to read a review, and it really works against critics that in general, because people just look at the score and go, well, that movie must suck, or they look at the one liner and go, that critic I usually like didn't like it. They don't go in and read the entire review to understand that maybe this isn't the kind of film that this reviewer gravitates towards, or maybe there's something in the film that offended the reviewer so much he couldn't give it a decent review. I've seen many films that have had ratings on Rotten Tomatoes in the teens that I thought were exceptional films, and it was painful. And I felt the pain of that filmmaker getting that, because it's like a scarlet letter. I wrote a little bit about this, and you don't really know the value of a film until you watch it 10 years later, 15 years later, because there are many critics who've gone back and said, I was wrong about that film. Yeah, you were wrong. Fuck you, because you destroyed that film in its day when it needed to be considered a successful film at the box office.
Yeah. There are so many movies that got destroyed. I mean, Scarface, for instance,
Exactly.
Brian De Palma, it was torn apart.
All the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes for Scarface today are revisionist. They're reviews of the movie being re-released and people coming around on it. Yeah. I'm not sure Running Scared would get as low Rotten Tomatoes score today as it originally got. I don't know that for sure, but knowing what a sort of growing fan base there is for that film out there, I'm not saying it'll get in the 90s because it still pisses people off, but I think it would probably get closer to a 60s or 70 type score. And I want to say I don't care about Rotten Tomatoes. I want to say I don't give a shit about it, but it actually damages the film. And what these critics don't seem to understand is when they give a terrible review to a film, you're hurting the filmmaker's career as well. Because when a film doesn't perform or it gets branded with a low Rotten Tomatoes score, people think, well, that guy's damaged goods. I'm not going to hire him to direct the next movie.
Yeah.
And they just like to write these snarky reviews and hear their own voices and say how clever I am. But I tell you, the best critics, even when they haven't liked a film of mine, have been very respectful about the intentions of the film and certain aspects of the film, and they don't shit all over it. And they're supportive of the filmmaker. And those are Roger Ebert was somebody like that, and there are a couple others. I mean, even when you think about Running Scared, right? And I always think it got very bad reviews. But I remember I got a phone call on the opening weekend of Running Scared, and it was David Geffen. And I thought, oh my God, why is David Geffen calling me? He must hate this movie. I must have offended him with the movie. And he had read the review in the LA Times, which just slaughtered the film. And he said, I saw your movie last night. I think your movie's amazing. I just wanted to let you know so you don't feel so down. And then that movie, I heard a lot of people in the industry saw the movie and liked it. Sylvester Stallone and Quentin Tarantino, and I heard from a lot of agents and executives. So it does make you feel a little better. And it's unfortunately, and that movie, that is a transgressive movie, and I think it was ahead of its time in terms of being a little bold by that of what it was doing. But I think I knew the movie wasn't going to really be appreciated even while I was making it, but I didn't think it was going to be savaged like that. But the other thing I was going to mention, about the opening of the reviews on Running Scared, even though it is a failed score on Rotten Tomatoes, you had guys like Roger Ebert who supported it, and even guys like Andrew Saris, loved the movie. So that gives me a certain satisfaction when such a legendary critic like Andrew Saris got the film. I don't care about some guy couch surfing and writing his Rotten Tomatoes review, but critics do, they do matter. I don't want to be somebody who says, "Oh, fuck the critics." Unless you're making a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie, which are generally critics proof. I mean, even you look at Ant-Man, the new Ant-Man movie hasn't got very good reviews. I haven't seen it. But really didn't. It may have hurt the box office in terms of didn't reach 800 or 900 million, but it still made a fortune in my view. I'd be very happy for one of my movies to make the amount of Ant-Man and the Wasp or whatever it's called.
There are good or decent critics, and I think some of them have a valid point. I have read so many reviews and I've listened to so many roundtable discussions or YouTube segments of critics, and some criticism is so absurd. I mean, how would, with all the crap that is out there and that is produced every year, how could you possibly say that a film like let's say Crossing Over is one of the worst or the worst picture of the year? How is that possible? Who
it's that ridiculous hyperbole that they use because they're trying to make a point, or they think it makes them sound cool to say that, but they don't understand that there's a human being on the other side of that film who's going to read this, and they're not even making a cogent point about it. They're really just here's the thing about critics I despise is the pylon mentality. It's like the early word on a movie is it's negative, and so they don't want to be shamed by their other by the other critics they know, by being the lone person who says this is a really good movie. I don't know what you guys are thinking. Everybody piles on. Everybody has to get the guys down on the ground. Everybody has to kick him while he's down, and you see this happening all the time. And a lot of times, 10 years past, 20 years past, people go back, look at that movie, and go, you know what? This is actually a good movie. Why was it treated so poorly by critics? And I also think critics today, uh, I want to put this very delicately, are afraid to give bad reviews to certain kinds of movies today. I think everybody's afraid of being on that side of the line of being canceled. So it becomes a lot about who actually made that movie, and it would not be politically correct to dislike a movie by a certain person today. I'm not going to sort of elaborate much more on that, but I hear this from critics. I hear this all the time, and not that I care that anybody should get a bad review. It's kind of like somebody you can just write a movie and trash a movie and take joy in that as a critic. I don't think they're a real critic, because they're people who should be celebrating the best things in movies. I think, if anything, if a critic doesn't like a movie, just shut up about it. Your review won't be missed. Why spread the negativity? Like, okay, let the public assume that this movie only got 3 reviews. That must mean maybe it's not a great movie. But to just pump this kind of negativity out there into the world, uh, I don't know. But they also, my experience is that critics also have the thinnest skins of anybody. So it's very difficult for a director to hit back at a critic without being called bitter or being, we're supposed to just be quiet and take it. Even when somebody's reviewing your film and giving spoilers in like the opening paragraph of a big twist in the film, we're supposed to just not say anything to them about it. And when you do call them out, man, then all of a sudden they're the first to run on Twitter or back on their whatever page they're using to review and call you out as being a poor loser. And so I don't know. Of course, given the way I think some of my movies have been treated, I do have a love-hate relationship with critics, but I do think they're necessary. I think it's important that people discuss film,
Yes.
but I also think critics discuss the film in a respectful way, in a way where if you have to discuss the failings of a film, you're doing it in a non-hateful way, and not like you're sharpening your knives for something.
Yeah, that's very true, and thank you for elaborating on that, Wayne. I would like to briefly talk about your script, which you co-wrote, called Mindhunters. You did touch on it a couple of minutes ago, and you said you were set to, or you wanted to direct it, but it didn't happen, and Rennie Harlan ended up directing it. The film was also produced by Weinstein, I think, through Dimension Films, which used to be a subsidiary of Miramax back then. Can you elaborate on what happened there?
Yeah, I never had any dealings with Bob Weinstein. I guess he was the guy running Dimension on that project, because I sold the spec script to 20th Century Fox around in 1997, and I did, I think, 1 or 2 rewrites on it for them, and then they decided they weren't going to make this film, and they put it in what's called turnaround, where they offer it to another studio to take if they want. And a company called Intermedia bought the film. Intermedia and Outlaw Pictures came on, and Outlaw Pictures was Bobby Newmeyer, who had made Training Day and a lot of good films. And they came on and they bought the project, and they so I think Intermedia financed the film, and then they brought on a bunch of other writers. Um, they brought on, I believe, Kevin Broadbent, who did the next couple of rewrites, and I think Kevin did a decent job, and he's a good guy. And then after that, I think they brought on a couple of other writers. I think by the time Dimension came on, they brought in Aaron Kruger. And in my opinion, Aaron Kruger sort of did the most damage to the film, because what started out as a really dark thriller like A Silence of the Lambs that took place in the FBI Academy, it was now a Rennie Harlan action movie with preposterous plot points of things that happened that could not ever possibly happen, that somebody could be in this place and exact place and a spear would shoot out of somewhere, or a liquid nitrogen would topple over, and all these crazy things that just were so, you just could never, it just became a so over the top. And I actually think Ray Holland is a good director. I think he makes he's a when he has a good script, like let's say The Long Kiss Goodnight, or even like Cliffhanger. I think he can do a very good job with it. But for whatever reason, that film just got sort of developed into that wacky kind of over the top style. And Aaron Kruger then didn't even take screen credit because he was the Writers Guild arbitrated the credits, and he was offered a credit, and he chose not to take it. So I can only assume he must have thought the movie wasn't very good and didn't want his name on it. Which at the end of the day was okay with me because that meant more residuals for me and Kevin Broadbent. But it's unfortunate. I thought the original script had a lot of potential. I did want to direct it, but of course, without a track record, my agent said, "Look, you can insist on directing it. The deal is going to fall apart." And by agreeing to just not push to direct the film, so I just made a straight screenplay sale on it, and I was able to. It gave me enough money to live for a couple years and not have to work at a day job, and be able to write the cooler and have a certain amount of independence. So I was grateful to the project for that. And that's about all really have to say. I mean, when Mindhunters came out, it came out after the cooler, even though it was shot about 6 to 8 months before. I never went to the set. I was busy preparing my own film. But when it got reviewed, there again, coming back to critics, they all seemed to focus on me because now they had heard of me from the cooler. So it all became about how Wayne Kramer suddenly wrote this crappy movie. And that's about it. That's the Mindhunter story.
Yeah. Okay. How many scripts are actually in your drawer that have not been greenlit?
Wow. At least about 15.
15.
Yeah. Not counting the ones I wrote many years ago that I threw out that I thought subpar. No, I have at least 5 or 6 really good scripts that I think would make that are going to make fantastic movies, and about I would say about 4 of them are in active development right now. I've just optioned a low budget horror thriller to a company, and we're actively casting it right now. So I think this one will happen, and it's a fun. For fans of Running Scared, they will certainly like this film, and a lot of twists and turns in the plot, and it's kind of like a reinvention of the babysitter and Jeopardy genre. And I also have another project which we're trying to get going, which is called Blue Movies, which is a movie set in South Africa in 1974 during the apartheid regime, when all the popular American movies were banned. Clockwork Orange, Lost Tango in Paris, some of the pornography, Deep Throat, all of those films. It's about a woman who careers the prints, these banned prints as contraband to this underground circuit of people, customers, and she has to get a printer behind the green door to a wealthy arms dealer who's using it to finesse an arms deal for South Africa on a Saturday night. She has to get it there to this guy's house by 10:30 p.m. And of course, her car gets stolen, and the films go one way and the car goes the other way. And she has 3 hours to find out who stole her films. And it's kind of like Running Scared. It's like a South African female-driven Running Scared, where she has to kick ass all through the night to find the films back. But what I love about it is this was really the climate in South Africa back then. You could go to prison for 10 years if you had these films. So just like any movie where the contraband is diamonds or drugs or human slavery, whatever, Hollywood movies were actually seen as such a threat that they were contraband. And it's a really fun movie. I mean, it's gritty and it's action packed and it's all about love of movies. And you'll see references to all these great 70s movies and the movies she's dragging around are 16 millimeters, so they're like these heavy cases. That's one. That's another one, and I have a bunch. I mean, the one that fell apart just recently is a crime thriller set in L.A.
Well, Wayne, if we still have some time left, I would like to talk about Paul Walker because he had starred in two of your movies, Running Scared, and also the Pawn Shop Chronicles, which I just rewatched yesterday. And I know that Paul Walker, I think, passed away 4 or 5 months after Pawn Shop had been released. And what are your thoughts on Paul Walker, the person and the actor, and what your collaboration and the limited amount of time you get to spend with him meant to you?
He was an amazing person. He was just a really decent soul. He didn't buy into all this Hollywood movie star crap. He was a he was down to earth guy. When he wasn't making films, you couldn't even find him. He'd be off visiting the Amazon or out at sea, or he had his close friendships. None of them were Hollywood people. He he was supporting his extended family. He is a kind soul, and he was a tough guy. I'll tell you something. He's probably the toughest actor in real life out of anybody I've worked with. It doesn't matter who you think. This guy could handle himself. But he didn't. He never projected that aggression unless he was doing it on screen, and we had such a great collaboration on Running Scared. He was so supportive of me once we started shooting, and I think once he saw what I was doing with the camera and the kind of tone of the film, I think he just got 100% behind it, and he was excited to come to work every day. And we developed a really good friendship out of that film. But I couldn't have made that film without him being on board with it, because we would be shooting some scenes, and we shot most of that film in Prague, and the crew, they didn't understand the kind of film we were making. They thought it seemed to them like we're making maybe like a snuff film or something. It was so violent to them. But if Paul had turned around at any point and said to me, Wayne, we're going too far on this, or we can't do this, or we can't do the scene where the woman's holding the baby and I'm threatening her in the apartment, and he was just having a lot of fun with it. He was the ultimate supporter, and it's really hard to believe what happened to him. Uh, I still can't get my head around it. Thankfully, I got the time to work with him on that. Pawn Shop Chronicles was a tough film, tough shoot, and I didn't have a great experience making it. But the time spent with Paul was good, and all the actors, for the most part. It was just a poorly produced and distributed, and everything that happened with that film was unfortunate. I don't think most people know I've even made that film. I mean, the distribution on that film is so bad, and they've changed the title in every country in the world. And the critics, just the lazy critics, I call them, because every time I make a film, the first thing they say is, this is like trying to ape Quentin Tarantino, and this is a poor man's Pulp Fiction. And don't you at least, I want to say the Chris, don't you have a reference that goes earlier than Quentin Tarantino? Why don't you say this is a film that's inspired by like Walter Hill or the Coen brothers, or and the movie was really supposed to be like the Coen brothers meets Creepshow kind of thing. It had nothing to do with Quentin, and there's no inspiration of Quentin's films for that at all. But Paul was great in that. He was he played completely against type, and he did some stuff. He did. I mean, there's a scene where there's that shootout in the meth lab in the scene Paul's in, and he actually ran across the room, dived, and conformed his body into a ball and got himself into a little cupboard. I don't know to this day how anybody could have done that. He was so athletic. He could do anything, and he was very underrated as an actor, and people tended to have a preconceived opinion about him. And I think that may have also been why Running Scared didn't open very well, is because it was written off as just another sort of Paul Walker sort of car driving imitation of an action movie, and it wasn't that at all. And then one of the very difficult things about Running Scared was the film almost caused a civil war at New Line because the creative side of the company loved the movie, but the marketing distribution guys hated it. And the marketing guy, they didn't even know how to market it. And what made it even more difficult was the real story of that film couldn't be told in the trailer because you aren't allowed to show children in jeopardy in trailers. So the whole trailer doesn't represent the film. The trailer, everybody sees the film, goes, I can't believe that's what the trailer of the film is.
Yeah.
So the movie had like one hand tied behind its back coming out. And I think if it might have been, more people might have taken a chance with it if they didn't have a certain prejudice against Paul. But once they see it, this is one of Paul's best performances. And I think Paul thought it was his favorite film he had done.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about Paul. And later, after Running Scared, it came back to me that when I was struggling to find money to pay for a crane or a lens, Paul would just do it. And not only that, I think Paul paid for part of Chaz Palminteri's actual fee to be in the movie when the film couldn't afford to pay Chaz all the money he needed to be paid. And so Paul did all these amazing things. And then on Pawn Shop Chronicles, both Paul and I deferred our money. Well, I deferred first because there wasn't enough money to make the film properly. And then I asked Paul to do it, and he didn't even hesitate about it. He said, okay. And that's the kind of guy he was. And to this day, I've never been paid a cent for Pawn Shop Chronicles. I did that movie for absolutely for free, which because the movie's not made enough money to ever pay us back. And Paul didn't get paid, and I'm sure he hasn't been paid back. Yeah, so it wasn't the best situation, but I wish it had turned out better for us. But I miss Paul. I miss having like a crazy collaborator who I could say, hey, let's go make this dark, messed up
Yeah.
movie, and he would be like, yeah, let's go do it.
Before I go into detail about it, I mean, you are right about the trailer because if you watch the trailer, it doesn't give you the right idea about the movie. If you watch the movie or when you watch the film, it's like a completely different experience because the trailer is so misleading,
Yeah.
at least to a certain degree.
Yeah, no, it's a very misleading trailer and doesn't and probably hurt the film in the perception of it, and you don't get a sense of the grittiness of the film at all. It feels like it's trying to be an imitation of Fast and Furious or something, and unfortunately, that's the case. I felt the Cooler didn't really have a great trailer either. That didn't get across sort of the grittier aspects of that film, but thankfully that's probably my only film that really got embraced quite heavily by, well, not heavily, but was well received by critics in general, and went to film festivals, and so it had a better reception when it came out, so there was more information beyond the trailer, or there was more of a wanna see factor, especially when it started getting some nominations.
Yes, I mean, it received two Golden Globe nominations and one Oscar nomination. Yeah.
They both got a lot of different cities film critics awards and nominations. So yeah, there were. It was a good ride, and he and SAG nominations. They got Maria and Alec got those, and I was very disappointed that Maria didn't get an Oscar nomination because I thought she was fantastic in the film,
Yes.
and it was quite surprising. But uh,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Absolutely. And Wayne, is it a fact that Fred Durst was initially considered to direct the Pawn Shop Chronicles? Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. I never met him. The producer, I think, managed him, and because he came from the music industry, the producer originally, and I think he brought the script to the producer, and somehow he had gotten it to Paul, but then he had a falling out with the producer, And so the producer fired him off it. And then Paul approached me about it because it was a financed movie. And he said, hey, these other movies are trying to get together. They haven't happened, get going. They haven't happened. So this is a movie we can go and have some fun on and do right away. And he said, read it and let me know what you think. And I read it and uh, I thought it was a fun script, and a really weird, dark, messed up, transgressive script by Adam Minerovich, who's a wonderful guy, a wonderful writer. Probably should not have done the movie because I felt because I could sort of see down the line coming that it would be accused of being a Tarantino ripoff, and I just, you know, no matter how good a job or how much I bled to make it a great movie, I think people are going to have their knives out for this kind of movie anyway. But I wanted to work with Paul, and I thought, instead of sitting at home looking out the window, I might as well go and have some fun on a film set, expecting it to be overall a better experience, which it wasn't. But that had nothing to do with the cast.
The film featured some pretty intense scenes. I mean, especially the Matt Dillon, Elijah Wood segment.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
Matt, I love Matt Dillon. He was such a great actor to work with, and Elijah. He was such a mensch. That is my favorite section of the film, actually. I think it's very disturbing to people, and I don't blame them. And I don't think you could make that film today. I don't think anybody would make that film with all the abducted women. I do think that what people don't get about the film, if they don't like it, is how darkly, transgressively funny that film is. You have to understand that film is a comedy, and I put a lot of work into that film. There's so many clues and little moments in that film that sort of give you indication that this story is actually happening in purgatory. That small town is purgatory, and so that's why Elijah Wood can turn up alive again in the end, and the gatekeepers to purgatory are the guys in the pawn shop. But I didn't want to come out and spell it out like that. I think there's some, Sam Hennings, who plays the preacher, is really Satan. He's such a great actor and a great guy, but I didn't want it to be on the nose. Originally, when Sam turned up on set, I hope he'll forgive me for telling the story, he had come with these claws that he put, these long nails he put on his fingers, and he had got them done meticulously and spent money, and he was so proud of them. And I said, Sam, they look great, but it's too on the nose. I don't want people to look at you right away and think you're a demon or Satan. And after a long discussion, he finally came around, and that's a pro. But when I look at the movie, I think we did a good job making it. I think it's for a under $5 million movie. There's a lot of scenes in that movie and a lot of like interesting style to it, and I do wish it was better received. And it's the first film of mine that I directed someone else's screenplay, so I kind of did come away from that with it's nothing against Adam, the writer, but I feel like I am a better fit for directing my own screenplays. Like the DNA starts in the screenplay with me. And when you're working with actors and you're debating a point in the script or an interpretation or something, they look to you as the screenwriter and go, okay, obviously you wrote it, you know what you're talking about. But when you're just a director on a film interpreting someone else's screenplay, the actors think it's fair game that everybody can have their own opinion about it, which they generally do anyway. But yeah, I definitely feel I'm a better director when I'm directing my own work, and I do feel the scripts I write have a particular voice to them, and just coming in and directing someone else's work, I think that voice is lessened.
And thank you for elaborating on that. And the film does have, let's say, many very powerful scenes, and especially also the torture scene which was pretty graphic with the fish hook in
Yeah,
Elijah's mouth.
yeah.
And I mean, but you are right. I don't think you would have this kind of segment in any mainstream movie today. Maybe in an independent picture. I don't know, but the scene with the ladies who are being held captive, you can tell how brainwashed they were and how disturbing the whole scenario was
Yeah,
when she stabs Matt
yeah.
Dillon.
The fun part about that sequence, that segment, was he goes to all this trouble to hunt down his wife, and when he finally gets her, he finds her in the most disgusting, terrible circumstances. And when he saves her, he thinks there's going to be gratitude on her part for saving him, and it's going to be happily ever after. And the fact that she's so like programmed by Johnny in a very bizarre way, that she turns on him. I there's something about that. It was so transgressive and outrageous, and the way Matt performed it. And a lot of people have commented on. He feels like he's is it Bruce Campbell from the Evil Dead movies? The way he in this manic kind of performance. And Matt is such a great actor. Matt can do this sort of elevated comedy, black comedy, or he can do very serious performances. And tonally, he just nailed it. And and I guess I like to be shocked in films, but not in a way, not in a how can I say, not in a way that's disgusting or just purely exploitative in a way like Human Centipede or Serbian Film or things like those films
God, no.
that go so far over the top just to push buttons. Pawn Shop Chronicles wasn't like that. Pawn Shop Chronicles was a lot of black humor, fun. It was definitely a very politically incorrect film. You know, the thing about Pawn Shop Chronicles, which might have played against it, was that each storyline is so tonally different from the next. Like the opening storyline about the meth lab and with Paul and Kevin's characters was like a Looney Tunes cartoon, and I wanted it to have that manic, exaggerated feel to it. And then the second one, the Matt Dillon storyline, is more like a dark serial killer, a serial abductor kind of storyline where that had more of a feeling like almost maybe more like a Running Scared or Freeway or those kind of movies where it was played a little over the top, but it also had this dark, twisted quality to it. And then the third one was this sort of also over the top, more the most comedic with Brendan Fraser, the segment, the most comedic one where he's the Elvis interpreter who sells his soul to the devil, but playing with a classic meeting the devil at the crossroads and a Southern Gothic quality to it. So all three of these are very different, like movies that sort of converge. And I thought I thought that was fun, and it's it's I wouldn't say it's a 100% Wayne Kramer movie or film, but I'm in there somewhere.
A pretty dark story and dark humor, and at the end everything comes full circle with Brandon's performance, and you see the fireworks in the background when the math lab blows up.
It's clever, you know. It's just unfortunate that you can't make a movie like that that has a non-linear storytelling and quirky criminal characters and not get the finger pointed at you that you're ripping off Quentin Tarantino, you know. And it's like
Yeah.
it's and that movie of all of them, it felt like to me the least Tarantino. Anything, you know, any criminals that have a sort of a comedic bent to their dialogue and their actions. I just wish critics would just think a little bit more out the box, you know.
When, if we still have a couple of minutes left, I would like to at least briefly address the music in your films. I mean, the Newton brothers actually scored the Pawn Shop Chronicles. How did you zero in on them? Because the previous main collaborator was Mark Isham.
Right. Well, there was just no money left in post production to really hire Mark, and I also felt like maybe this wasn't really a movie I think Mark would ordinarily appreciate. There were certain things in the movie that I don't really want to get too deep into it, but I think Mark would have not responded to it, and so I didn't feel like I wanted to go to him and say, Mark, do this movie for free, and probably not the right kind of movie for you to score. But I love Mark. I'm going to work with him again in the future. And Mark is just absolutely brilliant composer. And, I'm a huge film score collector. And of course, I was the biggest fan and still am of John Barry. And I was hoping I could get John Barry to score the cooler, but he was not available. But after I found that out, I realized, what am I doing here? 90% of the movie is temped with Mark Isham. I said, why don't I try and get Mark? And I was lucky enough to, when I approached Mark, he had a window of availability and actually came and saw the movie after I called his agency. He came the next day and I screened it for him. And he must have found it very strange watching it because it had all his music, his other scores in the temp, even scores that weren't released. And but he responded to the movie, loved the movie, and we started a really good friendship. We're still good friends. And in the situation of the Newton brothers, the producer and myself were not getting on very well because he had taken the film away from me in post production because he uh, he submit they we submitted it to Sundance and it didn't get accepted, and right away he thought, well, that must mean the movie's terrible, and he brought on some other editor to recut it, and I hated what he did. He just gutted the movie. But in my contract, he couldn't just take the film away and recut it. He had to prove through a test audience that he had made the better version of the film. He had to score higher than me, and he did not. So I scored quite a bit higher than him. So I got the film came back to me, but at that point there was no money to hire a composer. So he had already hired behind my back the Newton brothers, who I didn't know, and I had nothing against them, but they had started working on the film. And when I heard what they were doing, and this wasn't any fault of theirs, they were so close to the temp track. This producer had basically said to them, just copy the temp track. And I said to them, guys, you can't do this because I think it'll cause legal problems. I said, we've got 10 days. Let's start over. And here's what I'd like to hear it sound. And then these guys are such good guys. They didn't complain. They just went into action and said, thank you for freeing us from the temp track. They were actually grateful that I said, forget that. And I love their score. I wish it had been released. I think it had something to do with the producer has the rights to the score and won't release it or something. Um, but those are great, and now they've blown up. Those guys, they score almost every horror film that's out there, and they're really good. They deserve it. They're good. They're really good people, and they're really good composers. They're not actual brothers. I hope you know that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I like them. They're good guys, Taylor and Andy.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
score is nothing like what you typically hear from them in their horror movies. It's a very sort of Southern Gothic, quirky score. It's a shame it's not being released. It's a fun score.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you look for in a composer? I mean, we talked about Mark and the Newton brothers, but what do you love about film music, especially?
Well, I've always loved film music. I think I fell in love with film music because of John Barry and because he scores to the James Bond films. I was like most young kids, I loved James Bond, but I realized the music was doing something so specific. And then anytime I would see a movie and I would really love the score, it would turn out to be by John Barry. And then I started expanding my horizons and finding out about all these other amazing composers out there: Jerry Goldsmith, Morricone, Pino Donaggio. Um, but I didn't, growing up in South Africa, I did not have a lot of access to the soundtracks, and the few soundtracks that were on sale were imported ones, and I did not have money. My family did not have money. So it was more like going to the record store and coveting them, seeing the early Perez Saraban vinyl LPs. Um, but over the years, I just started always buying the soundtracks. And when I sort of got more into the industry, I was able to get like composer sessions and just having a really like I do think I have one of the best collections in the world probably. Um, and I look what I look for in a composer is I want to hear themes. I want to hear a musical identity. I'm not a fan of this just drone sound that you hear in 95% of films today, specifically in like the action thriller genre, where music is the filmmakers and the producers are specifically trying to have the music just feel like ambience in the soundtrack. Very, film soundtracks have become very atonal, very much like sound design. And I come from the school of wanting to hear thematic progression in the films. And I'm, someone who loves, what guys like John Williams or Morricone or Italian composers. I love some Piero Piccioni, or all of these guys, Christopher Young, these guys would develop themes for characters, and the themes would expand throughout the film, and the themes would merge with each other, and they would take a dark turn or a light turn, or John Barry was so effective at doing that, and Jerry Goldsmith were amazing at and I love, for example, like you take a movie like Casino Royale, which I think is the remake, which I think is probably the best Bond movie today, maybe along with From Russia with Love. But what David Arnold did with that movie is, since they were rebooting James Bond, he didn't play the James Bond theme throughout the entirety of the film. He just gave little hints of it, but it never resolved itself into the actual James Bond theme. And then at the very last scene, when Daniel Craig turns up and announces himself as James Bond, you get the full expression of the James Bond theme, and the music finally pays off. But when you deconstruct what he's doing throughout the rest of the movie, he's building there, he's getting there, he's putting the DNA of what is the James Bond theme together in each scene, but not actually giving you the Bond theme. And I love that kind of thematic construction. And Mark is wonderful at doing that. And it's like I don't even want to say it's old school. I think it's the way you should do it. So there have not been that many scores in recent years where I feel like I love what modern composers are doing, but there of course are exceptions. I think Clint Mansell is a genius composer. I think his score to The Fountain's probably the best score of the last 20-30 years. I love John Murphy. His score to Sunshine is almost, I think, as good as what Clint was doing in The Fountain. I do like the sound of these postmodern composers. I think they're still clinging to theme and emotion. There's an emotional quality to the music that's absent in some of these interchangeable scoring that I'm hearing these days. Um, but there's so many film composers that I love, and the and for me, it's always been something that when I write a script, I'll make the soundtrack ahead of time. I'll comb through my film scores and I'll create playlists. And so by the time it comes to temping a movie, I already have a pretty good idea of what I think the temp should be. And of course, sometimes you're surprised and it can't be that. It ends up being something else. But I can't write to lyrics. The lyrics get in the way of my thought process. So I really like hearing the film score, and that's a fun thing for me to do. And I like listening to scores. So
Right.
and I it's in general I will listen to scores if if I'm driving. Um, uh, Usually by myself, where I can just crank it up So my iPhone or previously my iPod would be filled with a rotation of some of my favorite film scores or new ones that I'm just starting to listen to.
Right.
Who do you like? Who do you like as contemporary or classical
Oh,
composers?
oh my God, that's gonna be a very long list. Let me mention several: Jerry Goldsmith, Alan Silvestri, John Williams, Hans Zimmer, Carter Burwell, John Powell, Harry Gregson Williams, Danny Elfman, James Newton Howard, for instance, James Horner, Thomas Newman, David Newman, Christopher Young, Michael Dana, Harold Faltermeyer, David Arnold, Daniel Pemberton, John Barry, Patrick Doyle, Marco Beltrami, Elliot Goldenthal, Mark Mancina, Trevor Rabin, John Ottman, John Debney, Michael Kamen, Howard Shore, Bernard Herrmann, Vangelis, Ennio Morricone, Elmer Bernstein. The list goes on and on. Bill Conti.
Yeah, I am such a Bill Conti fan. Um, it's unfortunate that his sound sort of never really got out of the, I would say at least the 80s, you know. So Bill, he was like I listen to his scores so often because he is so emotional. His music is so emotional. But I wish he was still scoring, you know, in a way. The genius of Jerry Smith was he could score for each decade and he could make it feel very contemporary. I feel like the height of Bill Conti's great scoring was in the late 70s through the 80s with score, obviously the Rocky scores, but like An Unmarried Woman, I love that score. Gloria, probably my favorite Bill Conti score. Bad Boys, I, the Jury, all those scores were just such beautiful, like powerful pieces of music or funky pieces of music.
Yeah,
And it's just, you know, when you see the kind of movies being made today, you can kind of understand why Bill isn't really composing for them anymore because I don't feel they could wear his music very well, and maybe not
yeah,
even John Barry
yeah,
anymore either. You know, I think Jerry, if he was still alive, would be evolving with where film is, and his stuff would probably be very almost atonal today in a way.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I think Bill Conti wrote fantastic music for many, many years. I mean, he's done so many great scores at North and South, for instance.
yeah.
Fantastic.
In fact, that project you were talking about, Blue Before Blood, I think I temped mostly with Bill's Gloria and Bad Boys, that emotional, you know, I love um he writes so well for the orchestra, but there's a propulsion to it. And at the same time, there's this an emotional catharsis to what he's writing. And then he can write these really delicate, beautiful themes. It's funny about like take a composer like Thomas Newman, who I think is a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic composer,
Yep.
and I love his score for Flesh and Bone. I think that's what it is, or Road to Perdition. But I didn't think he was ever a good fit for James Bond. And the two Bond scores he did, Skyfall and Spectre, I thought just, you know, he just didn't have the James Bond DNA in the way that David Arnold did. And I wish David Arnold had continued with the Bond series. But Thomas Newman in a project that feels like perfect for him, whether it's American Beauty or 1917 or movies where Whispers in the Dark's another one of his I love, um, where he's more suited for him. He's among the best there is. But at the same time, I don't think Bill Conti was a good fit for James Bond. I don't love his For Your Eyes Only score. The song is very good, but I felt it's very dated. Whereas there's not a single John Barry score that feels dated to me that he did for Bond. I mean, you could listen to them today and they feel as contemporary as they are. Even when he was experimenting with synthesizers in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, those scores still sound so perfect and contemporary. But then Bill Conti scoring Gloria or a contemporary cop movie or bringing him back to do the best parts of Creed, and I love what Ludwig Göransson did with the new themes, but the best parts of Creed are still the Bill Conti themes, you know. And Ludwig Göransson is a fantastic composer. He's probably one of the better of the best of the new composers. because the Creed score is probably one of my favorite scores of the last couple of years. I think it's just a beautiful score, and I'm talking about the first score. The second score is good too, but his first Creed, his theme for Creed, his original theme is so good, but it feels like it's paying tribute to Bill Conti still. It's like it feels like it's of the Bill Conti universe. It's not like a completely divorced theme brought into the movie. So I love that he honors Bill Conti throughout that score, but still brings something new and original to it.
Yeah, and Ludwig, yeah, he's a very good composer. I agree, and I think he did a very good job on Creed. But James Bond wise, I must say I really like Bill Conti's score, especially well, the song is great. What's the cue called? I think it's the second track on the album, a pleasant drive or a drive
Pleasant
through.
Drive in the Country or something. I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic piece of music, and it has that kind of disco-ish vibe to it. And he wrote some lovely cues for that, so I really enjoyed his Bond score.
I think there are good cues that belong in another movie. Perhaps it doesn't feel very Bondian to me. Is kind of, and even like I always did like. I mean, the music he did for the underwater exploration in For Your Eyes Only is also beautiful music, but again, it feels very disco informed and very like on the border of cheesy saxophone. And
Okay,
and I don't mean to be putting Bill Conti down because he'd be in my top five. I think he's just a phenomenal composer. Prayer for the
absolutely.
Dying, so many.
Lock Up. I love his theme for Lock Up.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and it works. It works in the movie.
yeah.
He did a what is the score he did? This wonderful score that not a lot of people have heard, but it did get a release. Uncle Joe Shannon. Uncle Joe Shannon.
Uncle
You know that
Joe
one?
Shannon, of course. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Completely forgot about that one. Yes.
It's a very emotional score, and it's got some. It's Maynard Ferguson does the trumpet on that.
Yeah.
It's a and it's never discussed when they talk about Conti's work. And there's a lot of Bill Conti that's never been released. It's very unfortunate. They need to get in there and get some of those scores out.
Yeah, but they did release or re-release some of his good stuff. Broadcast news, for instance, which he did
Yeah.
for James Brooks. Yeah,
They still haven't put out a real Blood In, Blood Out or Bound by Honor as it was changed. There's just a very short album that
yeah,
never
and
technically got released.
yes, this is
You know,
one of the most. This is one of the rarest soundtrack or score albums out there because they had to recall it because
yeah.
what was wrong? They either
They changed the title of the movie,
yeah,
and then the movie didn't do well, so they just thought, ah, forget it. But I actually do own one of those,
yeah.
uh, the original. I could tell you a story of where they all are and who and what happened to them, but I'd have to shoot you first. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. They exist somewhere. I just can't say where. And the Big Fix is another great Bill Conti that I like.
Absolutely, the big fix. Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
lovely.
yeah,
Lots of greats.
yeah.
He's one of the greats. But also Christopher Young, wonderful composer, Alexandre
And
Desplat.
he's such a nice. Christopher Young's a good guy too. Actually,
Yep.
I was trying to get Christopher Young to score the Pawn Shop Chronicles, uh, and he wanted to do it. I showed him the movie, but we just couldn't even afford a budget where he could hire musicians, and he was very apologetic and had to back out of it. And I understood, because he couldn't lose money, he couldn't pay out of his own pocket for the musicians. But it would have been great to see what he would have done because I did end up temping quite a bit of Christopher's music into Pawn
Yeah.
Shop.
Fantastic composer. Fantastic composer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 And I find it interesting that he ended up like again. Goes back to Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein threw out some of John Barry's score to Playing by Heart, which I think might be one of my favorite Barry scores, if not the most favorite of his final years of his output. That and probably The Specialist. But Christopher ended up coming in and rescoring about 15 minutes of it. most of the satisfaction I take is just listening to older works because uh, not I don't want to sound old fashioned about it. If a new score comes along and it sort of blows my socks off, I'm happy to champion it.
Yeah.
But I'm not a fan of like just listening to drony couple of action stings. I know I'm overlooking probably some newer stuff that's really good. I like Max Richter.
Yeah.
I think he's a brilliant composer. He's got a brilliant sound, but sometimes can sound a little bit like the same with each score. Um,
Yeah. What about Marco Beltrami?
I like Marco, and I think there's scores of his that I like are way better than others. Sometimes I I like the scores he does for like westerns and kind of the scores that sort of take place in like a southwestern landscape. I like his smaller, more intimate scores than the big action set pieces, and he's a
Okay.
very talented composer.
Yeah, wonderful.
I
Huh?
first when I first heard Scream, I knew he was going to be a rock star.
I was like 12 years old when I watched Scream for the very first time, and I loved the music immediately. I was so happy when they released the full score, and
Yeah,
I love Marco. I think he's a great guy. He's a very agreeable person. He's a very nice guy,
yeah,
and he's got so much to show for. I mean, Hellboy and or Blade
yeah.
2, Mimic. So much.
Mimic's a great score too.
Yeah,
I have to say, I do love Mimic. Even the first time I actually saw it with Guillermo del Toro because so long went to the Comic Con in San Diego, and this producer I knew had worked with him at Dimension on it, and we went there together. And he was already like saying, "Oh, they changed my movie and everything." But when I saw the movie, I loved the movie. I thought it was even in its. I'm sure some people would say this about crossing over, maybe, but even in its sort of truncated or butchered state, I still thought you could see the genius of him as a filmmaker in there. The way that creature,
yeah.
in the subway, it was brilliant. I don't know if he's ever put out the real full cut he wanted. I know it
It
might be out, but I don't know if
yeah
it's finished properly or
there
something. Yeah.
there is a director's cut of the film. Guillermo released it with the footage that existed, the footage that he shot, but he still, I think, is not entirely happy with the picture
Oh,
because he didn't get to shoot many of the scenes the
oh, I
way
see.
the
Yeah,
way he wanted to shoot them. So the
right.
material may be in his head, but he never got around to
Yeah.
shoot it because of the problems with Weinstein.
Yeah, I think I would take his butchered version of Mimic over my butchered version of Crossing Over, though.
Yeah, but I must admit, I still like Crossing Over a lot. I mean, I rewatched it a week ago. I like it. I like it. I mean, I would love to watch your full director's cut, but I must say I really enjoy the film. I really do. I
Well,
do.
thank you. It's a film that appeals to uh, people who don't live in America more so than Americans because they can sort of look to America from the outside and and myself, even though I've been an American citizen for many years, I'm still considered an outsider because I wasn't born here and didn't arrive here until I was 21. But it's definitely an outsider's look from within inside at America. And I think the subject matter of immigration, people just don't like to go see films about it because they think it's medicine or they think the film's lecturing to them about it. And my perspective on doing that movie, I wanted to do it from the immigrants' point of view, especially people who were slipping in the cracks or victims of bureaucracy or the desperation to get you and to try and do it right, but then things just screw up. And it definitely was way better received internationally as a film than here. And I think even in Germany, they put out a special release of it. I think I've seen it was like they treated it really well.
Do I have a shot at one more question, a final question?
Sure.
Given the fact that you've worked with, so many actors, I mean, also Brendan Fraser and Harrison Ford, I mean, you always hear these stories about actors being very sensitive when it comes to their performances. And in your experience, Wayne, have you had the experience of actors being very sensitive when it comes to direction? Is there anything actors do care for and something that actors don't care for when working with a director? Anything that makes them blow up for whatever reason or makes them be kind of very sensitive?
I think, well, obviously they don't like line readings. They don't particularly like a director to like say, "Here's how I do the line." And of course, if I had to do that, it would not sound anything like what I wanted them to sound like anyway. I think the important thing is to just have dialogues with actors before you hit the set. Really get on the same page about the characters. But it's about, if you're casting Harrison Ford, you know what you're going to get. If you're casting, maybe not always with Nicolas Cage though, but then you're casting him to bring an extra layer of craziness onto a performance. But for the most part, if you're hiring, well, Brendan Fraser in a wacky role like in Pawn Shop Chronicles, you know that he's gonna take it and like it's going to be the complete opposite of what he does for Darren Aronofsky. It's in that movie. But in general, I think in terms of getting there, 75% is casting, because if you cast the right actors and you know what they're capable of, they're gonna do that. William H. Macy was the perfect example. You know, I wrote that script with him in mind, and he was everything I expected it to be. And the same for Alec. I didn't write it with Alec in mind, but once I knew that he was going to come on and do it, he didn't disappoint me in that sort of slow burn sort of intensity that he brought. So it's very important to, sometimes actors don't want you to critique a take in a way like, oh, and you could be this and you could be that. You just want to say to them a little more intensity, or can you just be a little, dial it back a little bit? Okay. I remember a case in Crossing Over with Harrison Ford where we were doing a dialogue scene with him and Cliff Curtis's sister in that scene, Melody Kaza. And the script, when you shoot a scene, the continuity person, script supervisor, times it each time, because you don't want to end up with an extremely long movie. And she came to us and said, "Oh, this dialogue scene is running. It's running like a minute and 75, a minute and 55 seconds, or 2 minutes 15 seconds, or whatever it is." And then Harrison would go, "Oh, you want me to take 20 seconds off it?" I don't know how the hell he did that, because the performance seems almost the same. So it's like this unbelievable professionalism of these actors. So I've always looked at it like, if you get to direct an actor like Harrison Ford or George Clooney or Brad Pitt, it's like somebody saying, "Here, okay, I'll let you drive my Ferrari. Just don't drive it into the wall," because if you make a bad film with them, it can hurt their currency. It can be embarrassing for them and for you, obviously, but they don't want to be embarrassed, So they want to feel like this thing is going to turn out well. And because they're going to be on, yeah, you get a lot of the arrows shot at you as a director. Actors are like front and center there, and they do not want to be humiliated. So it's very, I've always believed that when somebody has said to me, "Oh, your film was very well directed in terms of performances," I go back to the writing. I say, "Well, I think really what you're doing is complementing the script."
Wayne, thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that, and I had a great time today, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Let's talk soon. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.